Good evening. Welcome to our special broadcast tonight. My name is Pastor Evan Willis. I'm the pastor of the Northeast SDA Church located in the Hidden Valley community. We hope and we pray that you are having a blessed Father's Day. We hope and pray that you are in good spirits as you watch this video. I believe that this video is a necessary conversation that must be had as we consider the life of Mr. Harvey B. Gantt, because Harvey B. Gantt is someone who's experienced great progress. He is someone who has done a lot for our community, but also he's experienced in what we are fighting for, which he's experienced justice, and he's fought for justice, he's worked for justice, and we can learn from his history. And so I want to encourage you as you listen to take notes, listen, observe, learn, think about the implications of what he's saying in this interview. He's going to highlight his early years. He's going to highlight his ascent through high school and on into college. And we're going to learn a lot about ourselves and learn a lot about the journey. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone who's watching. Today I have a privilege. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Pastor Evan Willis. I'm the pastor of the Northeast Seventh-day Adventist Church located in the Hidden Valley community in Charlotte, North Carolina. Today I have the privilege of interviewing and speaking to a monumental figure in Charlotte, in the South, in the Carolinas. The former mayor, Harvey B. Gantt. He was the first African-American student to attend Clemson University. He also graduated from MIT with a degree in urban planning. In addition, he was the first Black mayor of Charlotte. For those of us who recently finished the Last Dance documentary, you know that he was featured, or at least discussed, in one of the episodes concerning his attempt to become the senator from North Carolina. Unfortunately, he never accomplished that, but he's gone to accomplish great things and do a lot for the African-American community. And so it's my privilege as a young African-American male who, as a pastor in the city, to interview and meet with him digitally for social distancing purposes.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, Reverend Willis, and look forward to this discussion.
Yes, and thank you for being here. So just to start off our conversation, tell me a little bit about your upbringing in Charleston, South Carolina.
Well, I was actually born in Charleston and spent the first 3 years of my life, first 4 years of my life in public housing.
Okay.
In the Charleston area during the beginning of, during the midst of World War II.
Wow. Okay.
And grew up with 4 sisters. And I was the oldest of the 4.
Mm-hmm.
We ultimately moved to downtown Charleston, South Carolina from that public housing unit where my father built his first house. And I often say that's where I got the instinct to be an architect.
Wow. So he built it with his hands?
He built it with his own hands. He was a carpenter.
Okay.
And I learned carpentry from him early on.
Yeah.
Now, I was a kid.
Yeah.
And at best could just come out there and give him moral support.
Yeah.
But as he added progressively to that house over the years,
yeah,
I really learned the trade.
Yeah.
We were kind of a salt of the earth, working class family.
Mm-hmm.
The primary activities were church on Sundays,
mm-hmm.
church on Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on what organization you were a part of,
mm-hmm.
And going to school. And my mother was the big enforcer. She made sure we studied hard and did all the right things. And my siblings and I did well in elementary, junior, and high school in the Charleston area. But that was a great experience for me. We became aware of our race probably in subtle kinds of ways. First, sitting at the back of the bus, then going to segregated schools, not being able to eat at lunch counters, so forth and so on. But we also followed the news when in 1954 the Supreme Court said segregation was unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So I guess to describe my early years, my years in Charleston, one might say that we grew up in a lower income family where my dad worked 2 and 3 jobs, where I think we got the right moral compass to follow in terms of his and my mother's strong belief in Christianity, and that's where we got our grounding. And then we got a clear indication that we lived in a political world and started to think about how we could change things from that point on.
Okay, good. Wow, that a lot of depth to that answer. You talk about your parents. What were some in your household strong moral grounding outside of your home? What were some of your early influences that left a profound impact on you?
Well, let me just say that the adults in my life were influential. I mean, we were a strong family unit. I had a grandfather, 2 grandfathers, and a grandmother who we visited every summer, and we didn't hear any inconsistent messages coming from them in terms of how we ought to conduct ourselves. In fact, they made sure that we stayed in line.
Yeah.
But then I stretched out the people who influenced me after that were teachers. I still remember the names of my 5th and 6th and 7th grade teachers, and teachers in high school. And it really was because beyond the subject matter, and we tried to do very well in school. I did. But we got other lessons from them. The kind of encouragement that I saw with my own children in their school life here in Charlotte. And that was influential to me. Outside of the education arena, we were influenced by our pastor of our church. I still remember their names, and the encouragement we got in politics. People like J. Arthur Brown, who was head of our NAACP in Charleston, and Matthew Perry, ultimately down near the end of my high school career when we sat in at lunch counters. So there were all kinds of very good influences that sort of pointed the way to what maybe I ought to try to do and my sisters ought to try to do. I will say this, my father had an 8th grade education. He's probably the greatest inspiration for us. He and my mother. He had an 8th grade education, but he was determined that his children would go to school and go beyond high school. And a lot of people, he used to tell the story, would laugh at him because they knew that he had to work lots of jobs to get that to happen. But at the end of the day, all 5 of us went to college, and all 5 of us got graduate degrees. And for him, that was a huge accomplishment in which he gave the good Lord all the true praise that he could give to say that happened. So I had an inspirational childhood that influenced my life. And that's why I wish so hard that more kids would not replicate what I did, but or even my family, but that they have strong family lives and and good influences around them.
Good. So you said something rather interesting. You talked about how your early teachers and you remember your 5th grade, your 6th grade, your 7th grade, your middle school teachers, your high school teachers. Oftentimes when we talk about Brown versus Board of Education, we talk about almost the necessity for Black students to be integrated into these racially segregated schools to get better resources. Sometimes people painted as if the Black schools were so bad, as opposed to really talking about the resource disparity is really the issue. It wasn't that the teachers and the instruction wasn't good, but that it was the inequality of resources that were being distributed. And so with that being the case, how would you describe, and I already know it's gonna be positive, but how would you describe the instructional quality of your segregated K-12 experience?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think you hit it on the head.
Yeah.
We were deficient in resources.
Yeah.
We didn't have the best textbooks. You've heard that story many a times. But we, for some reason, had a great cohort of teachers
Yeah.
who literally cared about us.
Yeah.
And I think in hearing some of the stories of when even our own friends and others went into integrated schools
Yeah.
way back in the 60s,
Mm.
they often talked about the fact that the teachers didn't understand them and didn't take as much interest in them. I can't recall that happening in my high school and junior high school and elementary school years. And the reason I remember them is that my fifth grade teacher encouraged my proclivity to draw and sketch, which led ultimately to good things for me in that arena. I had a science teacher who taught us the best that he could in physics and chemistry in high school. And the reason I know he did a good job was he went beyond the textbook he had to teach us beyond that. And when we went to college, we felt prepared, competing against other students from other places, many of them white schools. So the teachers seem to be dedicated, and it probably is defined by the culture of the school itself. They actually believed that we were somebody and that we could achieve.
Yeah. Wow. So you finished high school at, was it Burke High School you graduated from?
That's correct.
Burke High School. And after graduating Burke High School, you applied to Clemson University. So my question is, why did you apply to Clemson?
Let me correct that. A lot of people misconstrue and misunderstand that. When I left high school, the only mention of a possibility of going to Clemson was an attorney by the name of Matthew Perry, who later rose to be a federal judge, who ultimately became the chief attorney on my case against Clemson.
Wow.
But we met him after we had been arrested along with some other students arrested for sit-in challenges, that a demonstration we had at the end of my high school career.
Okay.
And he said, some of you ought to consider the possibility of going to one of the state's predominantly, one of the state's white institutions, like the University of South Carolina and at Clemson.
Yeah.
That crossed my mind. But at that point, when he said that, I had already applied under the guidance of my guidance counselor to Howard University, Tuskegee, A&T, and then she encouraged me to apply to some white institutions. Since I wanted to study architecture, she felt that it would be very much in my best interest to try to learn in an environment of white people, since my whole high school career, my whole early secondary career was in segregated schools with all black students. And I took her up on that challenge, and I went to Iowa State. Stayed about a year, and then decided I wanted to go home. And at that point in time, Reverend Willis, there were but there were cases popping up across the South of black students applying to these universities. And I said, why not? Let me send an application to Clemson. So I didn't do it right out of high school. I did it about a year out of high school.
And now, were you initially denied when you applied?
Yes, I was. Well, when I first applied, it's an interesting story I've told many times. My first application went in, they saw that I was a freshman student at Iowa State University, making good grades through the first couple of quarters. And they sent me a great letter back saying, we'd love to have you apply to Clemson. Just send us your resume, your high school transcript. And I sent those things off, and when they found out that I'd gone to a segregated black high school, they rejected that application on all kinds of grounds. And we ended up applying about 5 times, I believe. And finally had to settle for a lawsuit
Okay.
2 years later, in the summer of 1962.
Okay. Okay. Wow. That's heavy. Knowing that they gave all these grounds for why you weren't accepted, but really it boiling down to the issue of race. Now, you said Matthew Perry, who eventually became a federal judge, took on your case. When he took on your case, was that, in your estimation, an intentional approach to? Was there intentionality behind taking this case to Clemson?
No, that's another myth I think that was out there. Many of the folks who did not respect the application or what was going on assumed that this was a planned event, that Harvey Gantt went to Iowa State in order to get a little experience, and then he literally was going to be the plaintiff in a case against the state's institutions.
Wow.
None of that is true.
Okay.
At least I'm not aware that it's true.
Okay.
My desire to go to Clemson was simply that I didn't like cold winters in Iowa. And while the people were nice, I had long decided that I was going to practice architecture and build churches and schools.
Wow.
In the Carolinas.
Wow.
And it occurred to me that the kids who were going to school with me at Iowa were going to build churches and schools and buildings in Iowa, and I wasn't going to stay there.
Yeah.
So to an 18-year-old kid,
yeah,
the logic was when I found out that Clemson was a very good school of architecture, had a good school of architecture.
Yeah.
I said I'm going to apply, and those first 2 or 3 applications were done without the assistance of an attorney.
Gotcha.
And when they finally started continually rejecting them,
yeah,
we said, let's go back to that guy who helped us in the sit-ins.
Wow.
And that's what happened.
Wow.
But people thought I had conspired to do this, and
yeah,
that really is not the case.
Okay. Okay. So how was your treatment? I know you said the people in Iowa State were nice, so I assume it was a good experience. There wasn't a lot of pushback from your classmates.
It was not an experience that deterred my interest in going to school in an integrated setting.
Okay.
First of all, I discovered a lot of things about myself. Having gone to segregated schools,
yeah,
I was emboldened by the fact that I could compete in that environment, and felt even better about my race and my ability to keep up. And so that made me less fearsome of what might happen to me when I get to Clemson. The people at Iowa State were very nice. I mean, the only question I had from the guys that I lived with in the dorms was, why would I want to put myself or subject myself to the kind of environment that they suspected might be waiting for me in the South? And of course, they had this 6 o'clock news every night to watch in September of 1962. James Meredith trying to get into the University of Mississippi.
Yeah.
All the problems associated with that.
Yeah.
Or in 1961, a couple of students trying to go to the University of Georgia.
Yeah.
So they felt they were trying to convince me to stay in Iowa as opposed to going to Clemson.
Okay. Okay. Talk to me a little bit more about the protracted legal battle, from what you can remember, between you and Clemson as you were trying to get in.
Well, my lawyers made me understand early on that there was no question that we were going to win this case. That segregation was unconstitutional.
Yeah.
And nobody had really knocked on Clemson's door.
Yeah.
Or for that matter, any other institution in South Carolina.
Wow.
No other person of color had ever done that. So it was not going to be a losing battle, but it might not be an immediate victory either. And that is exactly what happened. We went to the courtrooms in Anderson and Greenville, South Carolina. Federal District Court, full trial was held. An interesting sidelight was during the breaks in the trial, the attorneys from both sides would get together, and they weren't talking about who was going to win the case.
Yeah.
They were talking about the inevitability of my enrolling at Clemson, perhaps by January of the following year.
Yeah.
And I thought that was amusing. My lawyers explained to me that this was the kind of posturing that the attorneys were going to do. They're paid by the state of South Carolina to exhaust every legal remedy they had at their disposal. And when that was exhausted, they would then say to the citizens of the state, we did everything we could to keep this from happening. But it's going to happen, and Harvey Gantt's going to go to Clemson, and that's going to break the barrier. So, in effect, the trial was interesting to watch. The outcome was not as exciting because we knew what the outcome was going to be. The federal district court judge did, in fact, reject our petition on the grounds that Clemson didn't do anything special with my application. I just didn't meet the requirements, and which was ridiculous on its face. The appeals court unanimously approved my admission, and that's the judgment that ultimately prevailed, because the judge ordered that I be allowed to attend in January of 1963.
So in essence, what you're telling me is that the state knew it was inevitable, but from a political standpoint, to save face to their white citizens, they want to make it seem as if they did everything they could to prevent it from happening.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And I always thought it was a huge waste of money and time for them to do this, but this was the kind of resistance that they had to make. So we finally entered in January.
It kind of reminds me, we're going to get to this point later in the conversation, but it makes me think a little bit about President Trump. Right now, he's exhausting resources to send the National Guard across the state across the country to various cities to mitigate the protests going on. But he's not also applying pressure to the governor or to the courts in Minnesota to try to get all the officers charged. There's a simpler way to save resources, but we're expending resources. And then as we're going through this coronavirus crisis, we're being told we don't have any money.
And there is a great deal of similarity in terms of the deflection and all the other kinds of games that people are playing rather than getting directly at the truth and doing something about it. But we've seen this play out so many times over the last half century and more.
And it seems as if he knows that it's re-election year and he has to at least appease his supporters to make it seem as if we're doing everything we can, whether that be the white evangelicals or some of the white nationalist groups that support him. Another question I have is, after you got on Clemson's campus and after you were there, do you have any obstacles, and what were those obstacles you faced as a Black, the first, because I understand your wife came not too long after, the first Black student on Clemson's campus?
I used to pray to God that he would give me just the stability and the wisdom and the understanding to manage my way through this university, recognizing that I was the only one of 7,000 at that time plus students of color on the campus. That I had chosen this path, but I just wanted the guidance that I thought was necessary. So I prayed a lot. And what he did is he sent me a lot of comfort in the sense that my first day that I left the room to go get some food, I was met at the door by African Americans who managed and ran the dining hall.
Yeah.
They made sure that I felt comfortable in what they were serving me and so forth and so on. And then I ultimately met a number of students who represented the Christian Fellowship Group at campus, and they were very positive and invited me to attend their sessions, and they did the Christian thing to do, which is to treat me as a neighbor.
Yeah.
For the most part, most of the students were indifferent to my presence.
Yeah.
And the students that I grew closest to, that I maintained friendship with even in my golden years, are the people at the architecture school. So we grew up in the profession together.
Yeah.
We ran businesses and practices, consulted with each other.
Yeah.
They became my real friends on the campus. But what really gave me the emotional support was the African American community around me, both on the campus and in the small communities that they came from, in terms of church and in terms of just having a place to hang out, and on the weekends when social activities were not, I won't say they weren't open to me, because I did have a situation where an event occurred that I did attend. Yeah. But most times on the weekends I spent in the Black community.
Yeah. It's fascinating because what you're doing is bringing something to my mind. It's that these institutions were to an extent integrated, but it was a certain type of integration they wanted. It was an integration in which people of color were in a subservient role, not as, let's say, the professor, not as a student along their sides, but someone in a lower position. And so while they're fighting to keep you out, they're still bringing people like you in, but only in a capacity in which they are not seen as equal.
And they've been there from the very beginning, I guess, since Thomas Green Clemson organized the university, or the college at that time. And it obviously was a practice all over. They did not mind the presence of African Americans. They wanted them in subservient roles. And one of the most poignant things I thought that happened to me was, as I would walk through that cafeteria line and get served, you could almost see the pride on the faces of the folks who were working there. To say, you know, one day my child, my cousin, my uncle may be a student on the other side of the line receiving the food. And that connection, I think, inspired a lot of people, because in years to follow, there were some of those kids that went to Clemson, and that makes me feel good.
Wow. That story is very inspiring.
Wow, that interview was certainly amazing. I learned a lot. I walked away with a lot from that interview, and I hope you did as well. One of the things that was very important for me as I listened and learned from Mr. Gantt was it taught me how to think about my own community. That is to say, oftentimes many of us are fed deficit narratives about growing up in what some would deem poverty. But what I learned from Mr. Gantt is that we need to take back our own narrative. You know, he went to segregated schools, but he was not given a deficient education. The issue was not that Black students were unable to learn from Black teachers. The issue was that Black students needed resources, they needed funding, they needed support to make sure that they were able to continue and achieve at high levels. Mr. Gantt went on to integrate Clemson, and another major takeaway for me was simply this. As he was in the legal realm, as he was in the courtroom, people were not, how should you say, the people knew, the lawyers knew it was inevitable for him to get there. And it demonstrates to me the importance of policy change. Yes, there are many protests. Yes, there are many demonstrations. And I think those things are essential. So don't take anything away from what's going on right now. These things are essential. They make room for policy change. They make room for better opportunity. But it's also important that we not just protest, but those who are in the room make sure that we serve as advocates to make sure that the right laws are put in place so that we have support to get the inevitable achieved in our lives. That is to say, if there's something we're fighting for with healthcare, there's something we're fighting for with education, make sure that what we're getting behind is going to create the opportunity for what needs to happen to be inevitable. So if you're fighting for the changing of policing policies, make sure that you take the fight all the way to the door. Don't give up. Don't fight for small change. Fight for large change. And see, notice once changes were made at the SCOTUS, or the Supreme Court of the United States, it became inevitable because previous rulings were given in their favor. And so Harvey Gantt, Mr. Harvey Gantt, was able to experience progress because of the progress made through the courtroom and the protest. So for all those who are listening, all those who are observing, we encourage you to join us next week as we enter into this critical discussion about Mr. Gantt's life as mayor and a political leader.